Not every narcissist is loud, angry, or obvious. Some of them become quiet, controlled, and disturbingly calm. And when an empath faces that version, things change in ways no one warns you about. This isn't about ego anymore. This isn't about insecurity or attention. This is about what happens when manipulation loses its thrill and something darker takes over. You'll feel it before you can explain it. The sudden coldness, the way their eyes stop reacting, the way your pain no longer moves them. You start questioning yourself, wondering when the person you knew disappeared and why your empathy now feels like a weakness being hunted. If you've ever felt drained without a clear reason, anxious after silence, or uneasy around someone who looks calm while you're breaking inside, stay with me. What I'm about to share may finally give words to what you've been sensing but couldn't prove. And if any part of this sounds familiar, don't just listen in silence. Let your presence be known. Tap subscribe so you don't have to walk this awareness alone. And drop a comment, even if it's just a single word, to remind yourself and others that you're not imagining it. What comes next may change how you see them forever. At first, the narcissist's mask doesn't fall off all at once. It loosens slowly, almost invisibly, until one day you realize it isn't slipping anymore. It's gone. This is the moment many empaths struggle to explain, because nothing dramatic announces the change. There is no explosion, no obvious cruelty, no public collapse of character. Instead, what replaces the mask is something disturbingly calm. The narcissist no longer tries to be charming, fair, or misunderstood. They stop correcting your view of them. They stop defending their behavior. They stop caring how things look, at least with you. And that silence is not peace, it's permission. Permission to act without guilt, without explanation, and without fear of being questioned. What makes this stage so unsettling is that the narcissist does not reveal this version of themselves to everyone. They choose the empath. They choose the one who sees deeply, feels deeply, and is already conditioned to doubt their own perceptions. They know the empath will hesitate, will look for reasons, will give the benefit of the doubt. They also know that if the empath speaks up, they are unlikely to be believed. The narcissist has already invested in their public image. To the outside world, they remain composed, reasonable, even admirable. But behind closed doors, the performance ends. The warmth disappears. The humanity feels switched off. You start noticing how your emotions no longer matter to them. Your pain doesn't soften them. Your tears don't slow them down. Instead of reacting, they observe. Instead of engaging, they withdraw. This is not emotional maturity. This is emotional absence. And that absence is where the danger lives. When accountability no longer exists, behavior becomes unrestrained. There is no internal break, no sense of, "I've gone too far." The narcissist begins to operate from a place where consequences feel abstract and other people's feelings feel irrelevant. They don't need to convince you anymore. They don't need your approval. What they want now is control through confusion. You are left trying to reconcile two versions of the same person, the one everyone sees and the one only you experience. That split creates self-doubt, isolation, and emotional exhaustion. You may start minimizing what's happening because it's easier than accepting the truth. But this stage isn't accidental, and it isn't temporary. It marks a shift from manipulation for validation to manipulation for power. When the mask disappears, it doesn't mean the narcissist has become more honest. It means they have decided you no longer deserve the illusion.
And that is why this phase feels so chilling. You are no longer dealing with someone trying to be liked. You are dealing with someone who feels untouchable. Evil doesn't always look dramatic or violent. Sometimes it looks calm, controlled, and completely unconcerned with the damage it causes, especially when it believes no one will hold it accountable.
When a narcissist reaches this point, reality itself becomes something they reshape without hesitation or emotion. They no longer lie defensively or react with frustration when confronted. Instead, they correct you calmly, as if you are mistaken about your own memories. Their tone is steady, their face relaxed, their words measured. That emotional flatness is what makes it so disturbing. There is no tension, no guilt, no visible struggle between truth and deception. They simply decide what version of events exists and present it as fact. Moments you clearly remember are dismissed as misunderstandings. Conversations that hurt you are reframed as things that never happened. Promises are erased. Boundaries are denied. And when you push back, they don't escalate. They look at you as if you're confused, overly sensitive, or imagining things. This quiet rewriting of reality slowly destabilizes you. You begin to question your memory, your judgment, even your sanity. Not because you are weak, but because the human mind relies on emotional feedback to anchor truth. When someone lies with anger, there is friction. When they lie calmly, without effort, it feels authoritative. The narcissist understands this. Their lack of emotion gives their words weight, making you doubt your own experiences. This is where gaslighting becomes most damaging. It is no longer a heated argument about who is right. It is a smooth, consistent denial of your lived reality. Over time, you may stop trusting your instincts. You hesitate before speaking up. You start gathering proof in your mind, rehearsing conversations, preparing to defend what you know you experienced. And still, they remain unmoved. That emotional detachment signals something deeper than manipulation. It signals moral disengagement. They have separated themselves from the emotional consequences of their actions. Your pain does not register as real to them. The impact of their behavior is treated as irrelevant. In this state, cruelty doesn't require anger. It doesn't need justification. It becomes routine. They erase events not because they forgot them, but because acknowledging them would require accountability. And accountability no longer exists in their internal world. This is why arguing facts rarely helps. You are not dealing with confusion or miscommunication. You are dealing with someone who has decided that your version of reality does not deserve recognition. The danger here is subtle but profound. When your experiences are repeatedly denied without emotion, you may start abandoning them yourself just to maintain peace. You may minimize what happened, tell yourself it wasn't that bad, or accept their version simply to stop the discomfort. This is how psychological cruelty operates at its deepest level. It doesn't scream, it doesn't threaten, it calmly removes your right to trust your own mind. And once that happens, control no longer needs force. It lives quietly in doubt, maintained by someone who feels nothing while rewriting everything.
At this stage, the narcissist no longer raises their voice, no longer argues their point, and no longer feels the need to explain themselves. The conflict you once recognized disappears, and in its place comes silence, heavy, deliberate, and unsettling. This silence is not a pause to reflect or a moment to cool down. It is a strategy. They withdraw emotionally while staying mentally present,
watching how the absence of response affects you. Questions go unanswered, messages are left hanging, emotional bids are ignored. And the more you reach out for clarity, the more they retreat. What makes this so damaging is that silence triggers the empath's deepest fears. The need to repair, to understand, to reconnect starts to take over. You replay conversations, analyze your words, and search for mistakes that might explain the sudden distance. Meanwhile, the narcissist remains calm. That calm is not peace, it is control. By refusing to engage, they shift all emotional labor onto you. You carry the confusion, the anxiety, and the self-doubt, while they carry nothing at all. Over time, this imbalance wears you down. You begin to feel unstable, overly sensitive, even desperate, not because you are, but because you are being deprived of basic emotional feedback. The narcissist understands this effect. They know silence creates more distress than shouting ever could. Silence leaves no evidence, no clear moment of harm, nothing concrete you can point to. It keeps you questioning yourself rather than questioning them, and that is why they prefer it. Their withdrawal sends an unspoken message. Your feelings are irrelevant. Your pain does not require a response, and your presence is optional. This message slowly seeps into your self-worth. You may start lowering your expectations, telling yourself you're asking for too much, or convincing yourself that this distance is normal, but it isn't. Healthy silence brings clarity. This silence creates chaos. It is meant to destabilize you while allowing them to appear composed and reasonable. The most chilling part is how calculated it becomes. They time their withdrawal precisely, often after moments when you were vulnerable, hopeful, or emotionally open. The contrast between closeness and absence keeps you emotionally hooked, always trying to regain what was briefly offered. You are left unraveling in private, while they remain outwardly unaffected. In this dynamic, the narcissist doesn't need to say a word to cause damage. Their absence speaks loudly enough. Silence becomes their sharpest weapon because it forces you to fight an invisible battle, one where there is no argument to win, no explanation to confront, and no closure to reach. Only a quiet erosion of emotional stability, carried out with intention and control.
When an empath begins to heal, something shifts that the narcissist feels immediately, even if nothing is said out loud. The tone changes, the energy changes, you respond less, you explain less, you stop chasing clarity and start protecting your peace. And that is when the narcissist's behavior often takes a darker turn. Not because they miss you in a healthy way, and not because they want to reconnect, but because your detachment threatens the one thing they rely on: access to your emotional reactions. Your healing signals loss of control, and loss of control is experienced by them as an injury. At this stage, their actions are no longer about pulling you back with affection or charm. Instead, they escalate in subtle, destabilizing ways. They may provoke you, test boundaries, or suddenly revisit old wounds. They may appear indifferent one moment and intrusive the next. The goal isn't closeness, the goal is disruption. They want to disturb the calm you're building because your peace exposes their powerlessness. What makes this phase especially painful is that your growth is met with punishment. Every step you take toward emotional independence is treated like betrayal. You setting boundaries is framed as cruelty. Your silence is labeled as coldness. Your self-focus is called selfishness. The narcissist rewrites your healing as harm so they can justify their retaliation.
And that retaliation often comes when you are finally feeling stronger. Just as you start to breathe again, they resurface with reminders, accusations, or sudden crises designed to pull you back into emotional chaos. This isn't coincidence, it's timing. They sense when your nervous system is stabilizing and attempt to reintroduce stress to regain influence. The most disturbing part is the intent behind it. They are not trying to understand your growth or respect it. They are trying to break it. Your calm feels like rejection. Your boundaries feel like humiliation. Your indifference feels like erasure. And because they cannot tolerate being emotionally irrelevant, they seek to reassert themselves by disturbing your inner balance. In healthy relationships, growth is welcomed, distance is respected, healing is supported. Here, it is punished. That's how you know this isn't about love or connection anymore. It's about control over your emotional state. The narcissist doesn't fear losing you physically, they fear losing their effect on you. When your healing reduces their impact, they experience it as a personal attack. And so they respond with behaviors meant to pull you back into confusion, guilt, or pain. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it explains why things often get worse when you finally start getting better. Your growth doesn't provoke them by accident, it exposes them. And for someone who feeds on emotional dominance, nothing is more threatening than an empath who no longer reacts.
When a narcissist studies you, it doesn't look like observation at first. It looks like interest, curiosity, care. They ask questions that feel intimate and attentive. They listen when you talk about your childhood, your fears, your heartbreaks, the moments that shaped you. They encourage you to open up, to be honest, to feel safe. And because you are an empath, you believe this sharing is mutual. You believe vulnerability creates connection. You believe being seen is a form of love. But over time, something subtle shifts. You begin to notice that the very things you once shared in trust are resurfacing in moments of conflict, not with empathy, but with precision. A fear you mentioned casually becomes a pressure point. A wound you revealed gently becomes a lever. A value you hold sacred becomes something they mock, twist, or threaten to take away. This is not coincidence. It is not emotional outburst. It is not impulsive cruelty. It is strategy. The narcissist has been collecting information not to understand you, but to map you. Every insecurity, every trigger, every soft place becomes part of an internal blueprint. They learn what destabilizes you, what silences you, what makes you doubt yourself. And when the time comes, they use that knowledge efficiently. They know exactly which words will land the deepest. They know which memories will reopen old pain. They know which fears will make you freeze, which hopes will keep you trying. What makes this especially devastating is the betrayal embedded in it. This harm doesn't come from an outsider or an enemy. It comes from someone you trusted with your inner world, someone who encouraged your honesty and rewarded it at first. That's why the impact cuts so deeply. You're not just hurt by what they say or do. You're hurt by the realization that your openness was never safe, that your vulnerability was never protected, that what you believed was intimacy was actually surveillance. Over time, this creates a constant sense of alertness inside you. You become careful about what you share. You replay past conversations, wondering which parts of yourself have already been turned into ammunition. You may start feeling exposed, even in silence, as if your inner life is no longer yours. And that is exactly the effect of weaponized intimacy.
It doesn't rely on loud abuse or obvious attacks. It relies on familiarity, on knowing you well enough to hurt you quietly, accurately, and repeatedly. The narcissist doesn't lash out randomly. They strike where it hurts most, often while appearing calm or reasonable. They may frame their words as honesty, concern, or truth-telling, but the intent is not clarity.
By using your own story against you, they undermine your sense of safety from the inside. You may start questioning your decision to open up at all. You may blame yourself for trusting too much, for sharing too deeply, for believing someone could handle your truth with care. But the fault is not in your openness. It is in their exploitation. Healthy people do not store vulnerability for later use. They don't wait for moments of weakness to deploy emotional weapons. This level of cruelty requires detachment, patience, and a willingness to disconnect from empathy entirely. That's why it feels so chilling when you recognize it. You realize this wasn't a momentary loss of control. It was planned. And once you see that pattern, you begin to understand why arguing rarely helps. You are not dealing with someone reacting emotionally. You are dealing with someone executing a strategy. They know how to push you into self-doubt, how to make you over-explain, how to trigger old wounds so you lose your footing. And because they learned these things from you, it feels impossible to defend against. The relationship becomes a minefield built from your own history. This is also why healing requires reclaiming your inner narrative. You have to separate your identity from the way it was used against you. You have to remind yourself that vulnerability is not a flaw, and that your depth was not a mistake. It was simply given to someone who lacked the capacity to honor it. Weaponized intimacy leaves scars that are hard to name because the harm looks subtle from the outside, but inside it reshapes how you trust, how you speak, and how safe you feel being seen. Understanding this dynamic is not about becoming closed off or guarded forever. It's about learning discernment, about recognizing that not everyone who asks for your story deserves access to it. And most importantly, it's about releasing the shame that never belonged to you. The fact that someone studied your weaknesses does not mean you were foolish. It means they were calculating. And recognizing that truth is the first step toward taking your power back from a blueprint that was never meant to be built. When a narcissist reaches the stage where they feel no guilt, it can be one of the most disorienting experiences for an empath. For most people, causing harm to someone you care about or have a connection with triggers an internal response: shame, regret, discomfort. There is some level of emotional recognition that a boundary has been crossed, that someone's trust has been violated, or that their feelings have been wounded. With a narcissist who has crossed into true emotional cruelty, that internal break simply doesn't exist. They are capable of inflicting pain without a single pang of remorse. You can see the effect of your tears, your fear, or your anxiety on them, but instead of softening, it sparks something entirely different: a detached curiosity. They watch your reactions as if studying a phenomenon under a microscope. Every tear, every gesture of hurt, every moment of self-doubt is noted, cataloged, and considered. They are not moved by empathy. They are engaged intellectually. Your suffering becomes data, not an ethical or emotional dilemma. You may find yourself explaining your emotions repeatedly, hoping to make them understand, hoping to awaken conscience. But you quickly realize that nothing you say triggers regret or moral reflection. They do not feel compelled to apologize. They do not pause to consider the consequences. Their emotional responses, if they exist at all, are limited to what fascinates them about human behavior. They are interested in the mechanics of your suffering, what triggers your responses, how long it takes for you to recover, how deeply their words or actions affect you. That is why their behavior feels so alien, so terrifying, and so deliberate. It is impossible to predict or reason with. You may begin to question your own perception, wondering if you are overreacting, if you are imagining cruelty where there is none, simply because no visible emotion accompanies the harm. But the absence of guilt is not the absence of intent. On the contrary, it highlights that the harm is intentional and that they are fully aware of what they are doing. Their fascination with your reaction allows them to refine their tactics. They learn which words, gestures, or situations provoke the most emotional turmoil.
They can escalate or withdraw at will, watching how you adapt, how you adjust, and how your inner equilibrium shifts in response. Over time, this creates a dynamic where your emotional state becomes an open experiment for their amusement and study. And because they feel no remorse, there is no limit to how far they can push. There is no internal signal telling them this is too much. There is no emotional feedback from guilt to slow them down. For the empath, this can feel like being trapped in a labyrinth of your own reactions, where every path you take seems to trigger new forms of scrutiny or harm. You may notice that this curiosity is not random, it is methodical. They seem to learn quickly which boundaries you can withstand and which ones crack. They adjust their behavior in subtle ways to observe your responses, keeping you off balance and reinforcing their sense of control. This stage is particularly dangerous because it undermines one of the core foundations of human relationships: trust. You begin to realize that no amount of honesty, openness, or emotional generosity will create safety. You are being measured, assessed, and manipulated at the deepest level. And yet, because they feel nothing, it is impossible to negotiate this safely. There is no shared emotional reference point to appeal to, no shared moral compass to engage. This is why they feel untouchable and why your reactions feel amplified. The empath's sensitivity and openness, qualities that normally foster connection, now function as a mirror reflecting the narcissist's analytical, detached cruelty. The more you care, the more data they collect, the more precise their manipulations can become. Over time, you may notice yourself walking on eggshells, not because you fear confrontation or anger, but because every reaction feels observed, measured, and analyzed. You are no longer reacting naturally. You are reacting in ways that attempt to anticipate their calculations, and that is exactly what they want. They are not seeking reconciliation, agreement, or even dominance in the traditional sense. Their objective is to maintain a position of intellectual and emotional superiority, to remain untouchable while observing the fragility they induce. It is a form of psychological cruelty that is almost surgical in precision, and the lack of guilt amplifies its effectiveness. They are unburdened by conscience and therefore unrestrained in their experimentation. For the empath, this stage is profoundly disorienting and exhausting. It can erode confidence, distort perception, and make you question the validity of your own emotional responses. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it is not a personal failure to feel hurt or confused. The narcissist's curiosity, devoid of remorse, is a reflection of their inner world, detached analytical, and indifferent to human suffering. Recognizing this allows you to separate your worth and your reactions from their manipulations. You realize that your feelings are valid, that your sensitivity is not a flaw, and that your pain is a natural response to behavior that is intentionally exploitative. Their fascination is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It is a demonstration of their capacity for calculated cruelty, untempered by guilt and unbound by the empathy that guides most human interactions. And once you see it clearly, you can begin to navigate the relationship with awareness, protecting your emotional energy while refusing to participate in a dynamic designed to exploit your deepest vulnerabilities.
When a narcissist reaches the point where they feel no guilt, it is one of the most disorienting and terrifying experiences for an empath. Most people, when they hurt someone, experience at least a trace of regret, discomfort, or moral unease. Even a momentary lapse in judgment triggers an internal response, a quiet acknowledgement that someone's trust has been violated or that their feelings have been hurt. With a narcissist who has crossed into pure emotional cruelty, however, this internal break is entirely absent. They can inflict pain without a second thought, without a flicker of remorse. What makes this stage particularly unnerving is that they do not act impulsively or recklessly. Their actions are deliberate, and they often have a purpose that is invisible to anyone but them. The empath, naturally sensitive and attuned to emotional cues, begins to notice the subtle patterns of cruelty. A harsh word, a calculated withdrawal, a sudden shift in attention. It all seems measured, almost clinical. The narcissist does not feel regret because they are not emotionally connected to the harm they cause. Their focus is not on the consequences for you, but on observing how you respond. They watch your reactions closely, analyzing every detail. Every sigh, every tear, every expression of doubt becomes data for them. They are fascinated by the mechanics of your emotional responses, by the way a small comment can trigger a cascade of feelings. Your reactions become a study in human behavior, an experiment that fuels their sense of control and superiority. This fascination is different from ordinary curiosity. It is not born from concern or genuine interest in understanding another person. It is born from a detached, almost scientific desire to observe, predict, and manipulate. The narcissist does not care about your pain in a moral sense, but they are captivated by the way it unfolds. Your emotional turmoil, your confusion, your attempts to maintain composure, these are all pieces in a puzzle that they are solving. Over time, this creates an environment of constant self-monitoring for the empath. You begin to anticipate their reactions, to second-guess your words and behaviors, to question whether you are overreacting or imagining cruelty where none exists. And all of this is exactly what the narcissist intends. By removing guilt from their emotional repertoire, they remove the natural boundaries that most people would experience. They are free to act without hesitation, free to escalate, and free to test limits with precision. One of the most insidious aspects of this stage is the sense of unpredictability it creates. While their actions are deliberate, the lack of visible emotional consequence makes it impossible to gauge where the line is. You may feel shocked by the intensity of their manipulations because there is no internal signal of enough. No visible remorse signals to you that they recognize they have caused harm. Instead, you are left in a constant state of assessment, trying to measure your own reactions against an unpredictable standard. This erodes confidence, increases self-doubt, and amplifies anxiety. For the empath, it often feels like walking on eggshells, not because of outward anger or explosive behavior, but because every interaction is an experiment in which you are the subject.
The narcissist's detachment also amplifies the effectiveness of their manipulations. When a person feels guilty for causing harm, they may temper their actions, apologize, or seek to repair the relationship. The narcissist, however, is unburdened by any such constraints. They can push, provoke, and destabilize without any internal resistance. Your reactions are absorbed, cataloged, and used to refine future behavior. Over time, they build a highly accurate map of your vulnerabilities, emotional triggers, and patterns of response. This allows them to manipulate with surgical precision, often while maintaining a calm, composed exterior. The contrast between their apparent composure and your emotional turbulence heightens the sense of disorientation. It can make you feel as though your emotions are the problem, rather than the narcissist's calculated actions. Another critical element of this stage is that the narcissist's fascination can become addictive in a sense. Just as scientists become engrossed in observing a complex phenomenon, they derive a sense of intellectual stimulation from watching how you respond to stress, conflict, or emotional exposure. Your empathy, openness, and emotional availability are no longer just traits, they are variables in an ongoing experiment. This is why, for the empath, it can feel impossible to establish boundaries or disengage. The narcissist studies, adapts, and recalibrates based on every attempt you make to protect yourself, ensuring that your emotional energy is constantly engaged, drained, and analyzed. Importantly, recognizing this dynamic is not an indictment of your sensitivity or capacity for empathy. Feeling hurt, confused, or destabilized is a normal and natural response to behavior designed to exploit emotional intelligence. The narcissist's lack of guilt is a reflection of their own internal world, not a measure of your worth or strength. Understanding the nature of their fascination allows you to begin separating your responses from their manipulations, to reclaim emotional autonomy, and to recognize that the intensity of their attention is not proof of connection but of calculated observation. Finally, the absence of remorse coupled with intense curiosity marks a dangerous stage of narcissistic behavior. It signals moral disengagement, emotional detachment, and a focus on control that transcends ordinary manipulation. The empath becomes both the target and the subject of study, creating a dynamic in which trust, emotional security, and self-confidence are systematically undermined. Recognizing this allows the empath to reclaim awareness, to protect their boundaries, and to see the narcissist's behavior for what it truly is: a deliberate, unfeeling observation of human vulnerability, devoid of conscience, yet deeply calculated in its intent. Understanding that they feel no guilt, only curiosity, is not just an insight, it is a survival tool. It frames the behavior, clarifies the intent, and provides a roadmap for navigating interactions with someone who is both fascinated by and indifferent to your emotional reality. In the end, the narcissist's fascination is not a reflection of your inadequacy, but a measure of their detachment and strategic cruelty, reminding the empath that true protection begins with awareness and detachment from their manipulative observation.
When a narcissist reaches the stage where your pain begins to validate their existence, the dynamic shifts into something far more disturbing than manipulation or control. At this point, your suffering is no longer a side effect of their behavior, it becomes the purpose. They do not merely want influence over you, nor do they seek admiration or validation in conventional ways anymore. Instead, they measure their sense of self through the impact they have on your emotional state. Seeing you hurt reassures them that they still matter, that they still have power, and that they can still reach inside you and move something.
Your tears, your anxiety, your confusion, and even your silence become evidence that they are significant. Without that reaction, they feel empty, invisible, and insignificant. So they provoke it deliberately. This is where narcissism crosses into emotional sadism, because your pain is no longer incidental, it is affirming. For the empath, this stage is deeply confusing because it contradicts basic human expectations. Most people are distressed by the suffering they cause, especially in someone they once claimed to care about. Even unhealthy individuals often feel defensive, guilty, or ashamed. But here, the narcissist feels something entirely different. There is a subtle satisfaction in knowing they can still disturb your inner world. Your emotional reaction becomes proof of life for them, a reminder that they have not lost relevance. When you react, explain yourself, cry, or try to make sense of their behavior, they feel grounded in their own importance. When you don't react, they feel threatened. This is why they escalate. This is why moments of your vulnerability are often followed by calculated actions meant to reopen wounds. They are not trying to fix anything. They are trying to feel something about themselves through you. This dynamic creates a cruel inversion of emotional reality. Your pain, which should signal harm and call for care, becomes nourishment for someone else's identity. The narcissist begins to associate your suffering with confirmation of their power. They may deny this consciously, but behavior reveals the truth. They appear energized after conflict. They seem calmer once you are destabilized. They may even provoke emotional reactions and then withdraw, as if reassured by the chaos they leave behind. This is emotional sadism, not necessarily expressed through overt cruelty or rage, but through the quiet gratification of knowing they can still wound you. It is subtle, often invisible to outsiders, and deeply corrosive to the empath's sense of self. Over time, the empath begins to notice a pattern. Peace triggers tension, calm invites disruption, healing is followed by provocation. The narcissist seems most alive when you are most unsettled. This is not accidental. When your emotional state stabilizes, the narcissist feels a loss of significance. Your independence threatens their internal narrative. If you no longer react, they no longer feel real. So they seek reactions deliberately, sometimes through criticism, sometimes through silence, sometimes through sudden reappearances or reminders of past pain. The goal is not reconciliation or understanding. The goal is impact. Any reaction will do, as long as it proves they still occupy space in your emotional world. This is where the empath often becomes trapped in a cycle of over-explaining and self-blame. You may believe that if you communicate better, stay calmer, or become more understanding, the conflict will resolve. But resolution is not what the narcissist is seeking. Your emotional labor sustains them. Your distress validates them. The more you try to make sense of their behavior, the more you unknowingly participate in the dynamic that feeds it. And because empaths are naturally introspective, they tend to look inward for answers, questioning their own reactions rather than recognizing the sadistic reinforcement happening in front of them. The emotional toll of this stage is profound. You may start feeling drained without clear cause, anxious even in moments of quiet, or guilty for wanting distance. You might notice that your body reacts before your mind does. Tightness, unease, exhaustion, signals that something is deeply wrong even when nothing overtly abusive is happening. That's because your nervous system senses that your pain is being used, not addressed. Emotional sadism doesn't require constant cruelty.
It requires only the knowledge that someone else's suffering restores your sense of power. And once that association is formed, the narcissist has little incentive to stop.
The turning point for the empath often comes with awareness. Once you see that the narcissist derives significance from your pain, you can begin to disentangle your emotional energy from their sense of identity. You may realize that disengagement, detachment, and self-protection are not only necessary, but also empowering. Your peace, your boundaries, and your emotional stability cease to be sources of validation for them and instead become tools for reclaiming your life. The narcissist thrives on emotional proof. The moment you refuse to provide it, their power diminishes. Ultimately, this stage of narcissism illustrates the extreme consequences of unchecked emotional detachment and moral disengagement. When a person relies on the suffering of others to validate their own existence, the relationship is no longer one of mutual interaction. It becomes a mechanism for cruelty. Emotional reactions, once natural and human, are weaponized to affirm the narcissist's relevance. For the empath, survival requires recognizing this truth, separating their own emotional reality from the narcissist's needs, and understanding that stepping out of the cycle of pain is the only way to protect one's inner life. Your pain does not define your worth. Your suffering is not proof of failure. In fact, stepping away from giving them validation through your emotional responses is the first step toward reclaiming autonomy and freedom. The narcissist's need for your pain is a reflection of their emptiness, not yours. Understanding that allows the empath to see clearly, protect themselves, and finally begin to heal. What makes this especially dangerous is how easily it can be hidden. To outsiders, the narcissist may appear calm, detached, or even victimized. Your reactions may be framed as instability or oversensitivity. Meanwhile, the real dynamic remains concealed. Your pain is serving a function for them. This invisibility intensifies the harm because it isolates you in your experience. You may feel ashamed for being affected so deeply, not realizing that the depth of your reaction is exactly what is being exploited. Emotional sadism thrives in silence and self-doubt. Understanding this stage is not about labeling someone as evil for the sake of judgment. It is about clarity. When you recognize that your pain validates their existence, you begin to understand why things worsen when you try to detach, why peace provokes disruption, and why healing feels threatened. You realize that your emotional reactions are not signs of weakness, but signs of humanity being used against itself. And most importantly, you begin to see why disengagement feels so powerful and so dangerous to them. When your pain no longer reassures them, when your reactions fade, they are forced to confront the emptiness they have been avoiding. This realization is often the turning point for the empath, not because the narcissist suddenly changes, but because you do. You begin to understand that protecting your emotional energy is not cruelty, it is survival. You stop offering reactions that feed the dynamic. You stop explaining your pain to someone who uses it as proof of power. And in doing so, you reclaim something essential. Your inner life no longer exists to validate someone else's identity. Emotional sadism loses its grip when the empath recognizes that their pain is not a currency to be spent, but a signal to withdraw, heal, and choose themselves.